damn it.
Got this room. Let's just get this house right here. Oh, there's our house. You ready to come?
In 2007, Brett Ryan was a charming 26-year-old man living in Toronto, Canada. He was an extremely friendly guy who was always smiling ear to ear with his trademark grin. In his spare time, he could be found at children's hospitals reading
Behind you, James.
or at the community center volunteering as an umpire for Little League Baseball. But behind his seemingly perfect exterior, behind the scenes, Brett was struggling. He had to abandon his parents after dropping out of college and racking up over $60,000 in debt. While his friends graduated college and went on to begin their careers in medicine, finance, and education, Brett was only able to get a job as a part-time house painter. Brett felt like he had a lot of potential that he was squandering, but he felt like the debt that he had racked up was really his roadblock between him and the life he was supposed to have. And so instead of working hard and making some money to pay down that debt, he decided to come up with an absurd get-rich-quick scheme that actually kind of worked. On October 20th of that year, Brett walked into a bank near his home, and he had hospital bandages wrapped around his head and his face, and his left arm was in a sling. Then he walked up to one of the tellers and he handed her a note that just said, "I have a gun underneath
So
the sling."
that other guy was in Storm and just rifted the last guy, so they're about to get a free dub.
All the money she had, and Brett took the money, turned around, and calmly walked out of the bank. And he got in his car and he got home, and he was totally exhilarated, and he kept expecting the police to just show up at his front door, but they never did. He was never caught. And after that, he was hooked. For the next 8 months, Brett robbed a dozen other banks in the area, stealing almost $30,000. He became so confident in his ability to steal without getting caught that he began dressing up in these ridiculous outfits that included this huge, obviously fake beard. And in fact, the media dubbed him the fake bearded bandit. The reason Brett wasn't getting caught is because the police would get his fingerprints at the crime scene, but because he did not have a criminal record, his prints were not in the database. So the police basically just had to set up and hope to catch this guy in the end. And in the summer of 2008, they finally would catch the fake bearded bandit. At Brett's trial, dozens of his friends wrote letters of support to the judge, saying that Brett was actually a great guy, that this was a product of desperation, and a total break from his normal character. And some of the organizations that he volunteered with did the same thing, writing letters to the judge saying what a meaningful contributor Brett was to the community. When Brett spoke at his trial, he was incredibly remorseful and said he had allowed his debt to get totally out of control, and that admittedly he had not handled it well. And so the judge took all of this into account, all the letters of support and Brett's overall appearance in court, and he decided that this was indeed a break from character, and that Brett was actually a very promising young man, and that he did not deserve the harshest penalty. And so Brett was sentenced to just under 4 years, which, considering the crime, was a very lenient sentence. And so Brett went to jail, but then less than 2 years later, in 2010, he was granted parole and allowed to move back in with his parents. And his parents would say he was a changed man ready for a fresh start. But Brett would find life outside of jail was exponentially harder now that he was an ex-con. It was extremely hard to get a job, which meant he had no income. And without an income, he couldn't pay down all those debts he had, and so he had to declare bankruptcy. As for life at home, it was very difficult. Brett's family was very embarrassed about what he had done, and when Brett moved back home, it was obvious that all the neighbors were gossiping constantly about his family. And so Brett and his family actually moved to another Toronto neighborhood just to get away from all of that. But once they settled into this new neighborhood, Brett really knuckled down and decided he was going to get his life together and he was going to do it all on his own. And so he applied to dozens and dozens of jobs all over the place, and finally he was able to get some low-paying work in retail.
And then they sold a joke to a 16-year-old without paying for his job.
His parents noticed how hard he was working to try to get his life back together, and so they decided they would help him out financially so he could re-enroll in college and finish his degree in biophysics. While Brett was in school, he met a woman named Kristen who had a full-time job and lived in this beautiful home, and by and large, she had the life that he wished he could have. And the two of them quickly fell in love. Brett told her about his criminal past as the fake bearded bandit, and she accepted him, and she didn't judge him, and she said, "I still love you, I still want to be here." 2 years later, Brett moved out of his parents' house and into Kristen's house, And for once in his life, he felt like his life was going.
It looks like you knocked that guy
Then, a
down.
year later, tragedy struck when Brett's father passed away. And suddenly Brett went to his mother's house all the time to try to help her out. And his mother was very appreciative of the time he was spending with her, and so she actually began paying him for the work he was doing around the home. And considering Brett was a college student, this was a huge help, and in many ways really brought Brett and his mother together. A year later, in 2015, Brett proposed to Kristen, and she said yes. But at the same time, school was getting overwhelming for Brett, and he dropped out.
I need all the
But
shields.
he was too embarrassed to tell his fiancée.
Everybody come over here. We got a keg.
Everybody thought he was on the right path, and he didn't want to explain why he had dropped
I just
out,
sat down.
and so he just pretended to still be in school. Then, in the spring of 2016, when Brett should have been graduating, he got a very lucky break when a big tech firm in Toronto offered him a job. On paper, Brett should not have gotten this job. He wasn't qualified. He didn't have a degree. But in getting this job, Brett was able to tell his fiancée and his family that he had just graduated college, and that was how he was getting this job. His family and his fiancée were a little confused why they weren't invited to his graduation ceremony, but nonetheless, they were very excited for him, and they took him out and they celebrated. Then, a week after Brett accepted his job, the tech firm rescinded their offer when they discovered Brett was in fact the fake bearded bandit. Now, Brett panicked because this job represented this perfect piece to his web of lies that allowed him to pretend he had a degree and that everything was so great. And so he couldn't possibly tell his fiancée and his family that he didn't get this job. And so he decided he would just lie and pretend to go to this job every day. Meanwhile, Brett's mom began bragging to all of her new neighbors about her son Brett, who had really turned his life around. He graduated from college, he got this great job, he's got a beautiful fiance, he's got this wonderful home. Everything is just going great for Brett. At first, Brett was able to push the guilt out of his subconscious and just live this ridiculous lie. But as his wedding day approached, the weight of all of these lies and the guilt he felt, it became overwhelming. And practically speaking, he was worried about how he would explain to his new wife why he had no income despite having this full-time job. And so he went to his mother and he told her the truth about dropping out of college, about not getting that job offer. And then he said, "Can you keep all of this a secret? And can you give me a whole bunch of money so I can keep living this lie?" And she said, "No. And in fact, you need to tell your fiance that you're lying or I will." This was the worst case scenario for Brett, and one that he was not prepared for. He really thought his mom would be like, "Yeah, let's do it. Let's keep this thing going." But when she didn't, he didn't really know what to do. He believed if Kristen found out the truth, she would leave him and that would ruin his perfect life. And so he decided he would not help Kristen. Instead, he would kill his mother. Because he was an ex-con, he couldn't buy a firearm. However, he could buy a crossbow. And so he ordered his crossbow, he watched a couple of YouTube videos about how to operate it, and then on one of his trips to his mother's house to help out, he stashed the crossbow and some arrows on a shelf in her garage. Then, when he got home, he began designing these bizarre contraptions that were built out of fans and pulleys and broomsticks that, when turned on, would move around the room and click on his keyboard and turn his phone off and on. It was designed to help him build an alibi when he was out committing murder. His devices would be turning on and off again, giving the impression that he was at home the whole time. On August 25th, 2017, all his preparations were done. He woke up early that morning and he began getting ready for his fake job. At the same time, Kristen was also getting ready for her real job, and then at 7:30, when they were both ready to go, they hopped in their respective cars and headed out for the day. Brett slowed down at the end of the street and waited for Kristen to disappear around the corner. Brett turned back, went back into his house, he went up to his room and turned on all of his bizarre alibi contraptions that he made sure were turning off and on his devices correctly. And after a while, once he was confident these devices would work, he hopped in his car and he drove over to his mother's house. He got there around 10 a.m., he walked inside and his mother was sitting in the kitchen, and he approached her about changing her mind about telling the truth to Kristen. But his mother was staunch, and she said, "No, I'm going to tell her before your wedding unless you do." And so their exchange got really heated, and before long, his mother actually called one of his older brothers, Chris, to come to her house and talk to Brett to defuse this situation. Brett was furious and stormed out of the kitchen. He grabbed the door that led into the garage and stormed in to try to get his crossbow off the shelf. But his mother followed after him. Now, the crossbow had not been loaded when he put it up on the shelf, and Brett was not very good at loading it, and it would take several seconds to actually
Yeah, he's dead.
Because Henry and Chaswell brought someone, another different team.
She's going to see the weapon, and she's going to run outside before she gets it. And so when he reached up, he didn't grab the crossbow, he grabbed the arrows. and in a swift motion, he pulled them down, re-gripped them like a knife, faced his mother, and began attacking her viciously. She fell backwards, and a shelf actually landed on top of her, pinning her to the ground. At which point, Brett seized the opportunity. He got up, grabbed a piece of nylon, he wrapped it around her neck, and he suffocated her. As soon as she was dead, Brett pulled her out from under the shelf and dragged her to the side of the garage. He put these shelves back up, and then he began loading his crossbow because he knew Chris, his older brother that his mother had called, was going to be here soon. And so he hid behind the door inside of the garage and just waited. And at some point, he heard Chris's car pull into the driveway. Chris walked into the house. He yelled for his mom. He yelled for Brett, but he didn't get a response. And eventually, Chris made his way to the open door leading into the garage. He stepped inside, and as soon as he did, Brett silently got up behind him, and he fired one shot directly into the back of his neck, killing him instantly. Brett took Chris's body, piled it on top of his mother's, and as he was putting his cart over top of them, he heard another car pulling into the driveway. It was his younger brother, AJ. Now, at this point, Brett knows he is in too deep.
Henry's dead.
Finish the job, and so he doesn't have time to load his crossbow. And so again, he just grabs one of the arrows, and he walks outside, and he sees AJ getting out of his car, and he runs up to him, and he jabs the arrow into his brother's neck. And they're fighting in the driveway. Meanwhile, Brett's other brother, Lee, who's actually in the house sleeping, he wakes up to the sound of this
I know.
out of the driveway. He looks out the window, and he sees his brothers fighting, and so he runs.
Oh my God, there's two more people there.
And at this point, AJ is laying on the ground and is basically motionless, and Brett is standing over him, and Brett turns and he sees Lee in the doorway, and he runs off after him. Lee sees his brother running at him and just turns and runs into the house, but he only gets a few feet before Brett jumps on top of them, and then the two of them have this vicious fight where Brett is trying to stab him with the arrows, and they're basically both fighting for their lives, and at some point after Lee suffers several very deep cuts, he manages to throw Brett off of him, and he runs outside to his brother AJ, who's now called all the way to the street. And in fact, AJ had managed to flag down a neighbor and got his neighbor to call the police. As for Brett, after Lee had managed to fight him off and ran outside, he knew he was done. And so instead of chasing his brother outside, he put his arrow down and walked into the kitchen. He opened up the fridge, he took the bottle of water out, he left the fridge door open and just walked out to the front steps, sat down and drank his water while he waited for the police to show up. When they did arrive, his brother AJ died before they could save him. As police were arresting Brett, he kind of casually said, "Yeah, I should have taken AJ to the hospital and saved him. And the other guys in the garage are dead, crossbow to the head, big swing." In court, Brett was extremely remorseful and pled guilty to all of his charges. The judge told Brett that he was appreciative of the fact that he was taking full ownership of his heinous crimes, and that in many ways he was a victim too, a victim of this huge web of lies that Brett just couldn't get out from under. But nonetheless, Brett was given 3 consecutive life terms, one for each of the murders he committed. The only surviving family member, Lee, the brother who was attacked last and managed to run outside and escape Brett, he said that his life was shattered that day and that he can barely go outside because of his extreme post-traumatic stress. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it, so give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that,
Actually, I'm gonna get closer to the zone and then revive you guys while I'm in Storm.
If you haven't done this already, please invite the like button to come over and play Mortal Kombat with you. And when they show up, play real Mortal Kombat with them and uppercut them into the ceiling. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly or video uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallin1216. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is Mr. Ballin. I also have a second YouTube channel called Mr. Ballin Shorts where I post random short videos and lost episodes. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit. It's called Mr. Ballin. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's going to do it. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. And today we're going to look at 3 stories that demonstrate that. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please remove all the raisins from the Like Button's Raisin brand. Also, please subscribe to our channel, turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into today's stories.
No way, he's about to land behind me. No fucking way.
What the fuck?
That is insane.